Ammee wasn't always a warrior. In fact, for most of her life, she was known as the Princess of Vino. Vine was, of course, the richest and most prosperous land in all of Mantos. Her days were spent playing with dolls and learning how to curtsy from her Aunt Jasa. Jasa wasn't Ammee's aunt by blood. She was only a maiden of the castle that she took a special liking to her as Ammee's own mother had died when she was very young. Jasa and Ammee had many special times together inside and outside of the castle as she was growing up. But by age 14, Ammee was quite tired of all the dresses and dolls, and she wanted to become a warrior. Besides, she was actually quite good with a sword, just like her older brother Lewin. Her father, the king of Vino, ruler of the Nyans, was not happy about her decision to become a warrior and forbade her to train. It saddened Ammee that her father did not believe that she could be as good of a warrior as her brother Lewin, but she knew that she had to show her father what she was capable of. She acquired her sword from a knight named Fraught after winning a game of Gabo, paid the blacksmith to secretly make her a warrior's armor in just her size. She took sword-fighting lessons from Kreen, the best swordsman in Vino, and then she sat in her room, waiting for the right moment. A few weeks later, the sun was hidden from the sky by the evil spellcaster Groch, and she took that as the sign that she had been waiting for. She snuck out to the nearby forest and eventually ran into Bendegan the Wizard and Joonbudee, keeper of the marsh meadow. After a grand adventure, they defeated the evil Groch and brought the sunshine back to Mantos, and this is where our story really begins. It had been 2 weeks since the sun had returned to Mantos and Groch had disappeared into another realm. Ammee, Bendegan, and Joonbudee were given medals by the Butterbees, and a 3-day extravaganza was held in their honor. Soon the celebration ended, and the heroes had to part ways, and Ammee, unfortunately, had to face reality and return to her home in Vino. Before she left on her journey home, Bendegan stopped her and gave her a hug. "You were a great help to us," he said. "Thank you," she replied. Then he looked her over for a moment and squinted his eyes. "What is it?" she asked him. "Something's missing," he said. "Hold out your hands." The wizard took out his wand and said the magical words, "Hinum Yum Swand," and a brand new sword appeared in Ammee's hands, even better than the last. Ammee was so happy as hers had been destroyed by the evil Groch. "There you go. I mean, what's a warrior without a sword?" He smiled. "You're the best," she exclaimed and hugged Bendegan once more. Soon the two of them parted ways and Ammee took the long way home. When she arrived at the gates of the kingdom, she grew very nervous. What would her father say? What would her brother think of her adventure? Would she get to keep her armor and award? She thought best to keep her head held high and march into the castle like she owned the place. The guards allowed the princess instant access, and she marched right into the throne room with her head held high, and the sound of her armor echoing through the halls. The throne room of the castle was beautiful and draped in red velvet. Her father's banner, the twisted snakes, was sewn on the massive rug, the flags in the corners, and painted on a mural behind the throne itself. As far back as Ammee could remember, the room was always adorned with hydrangeas, her mother's favorite flower, a tradition the king kept alive to this day. When Ammee entered, Tinag, the high priest, announced her arrival to the throne room. "My king, may I present Ammee, Princess of Vino and Savior of Mantos." The king began to laugh long and loudly as the room of spectators and high-born so-and-sos began to gossip and cause a stir. Ammee grew very uncomfortable and angry as she stood there alone in the middle of the king's throne room. "Savior of Mantos?" the king questioned. "Tell me, my child, what is it that you did to save Mantos?" The king drank from his golden goblet and pretended to listen to her story as she ran down her adventure from beginning to end. She spoke of the Stone of Pulvar, their near death in the quicksand of the Desperos, their face-off with the Cumber Beast in the Lost Mountain, and their final battle with the spellcaster Groch, in which Bendegan made the evil being disappear. When she was finished, the room cheered for Ammee and her bravery. "Silence," the king barked. The room fell quiet and Ammee shuddered under the weight of her father's voice. The crowd waited nervously for the king's words. His fingers tapped the arm ends of his throne as stared through the princess. "It sounds like the little old wizard did all of the work, and you just followed him around just like you've always followed around your brother. You are merely a child who ran away and worried the kingdom sick. I sent 4 guards out searching for you weeks ago and they've yet to return. You are not a warrior, you are a princess, whether you like it or not. Now hand over that sword." Ammee began to cry and she held her sword tight against her chest. No, it is mine. The king stood up and grew very angry. His goblet flung to the ground, drowning the twisted snake's pattern on the floor. One of the many servants ran out and picked up the goblet, refilled it, and sat it back in place without the king noticing. I am the king of Vino and your father, and you will obey me when I give you a command. Now hand over that sword. Ammee slowly removed her sword from its sheath and then threw it on the floor. She continued to grasp the empty sheath tightly, and as her tears got the better of her, she began to sniffle. Smells like that awful mountain, she thought as a tear disappeared into the fabric. The king smiled as if he had won some great battle, and Ammee turned to walk out of the throne room. Is that it, little one? Nothing more to say for yourself? The king egged her on. Ammee turned around to address the room and angrily wiped the tears from her face as if she was swatting a fly. I hope Grotch does come back, and when he does, I'm not going to save any of you. The crowd began to snicker and stir. The king, seated back on his throne, drank from his golden goblet and watched his daughter leave the room. A practiced stone face if ever a king had shown one. Ammee laid in her bed and cried for days, refusing to eat or talk to anyone. She knew what she had done for her land, but everyone in the king's court had just sat there mocking her. My father is the worst, she thought as her tears kept dripping onto her pillow. Her medal of bravery that she had received from the Butterbies hung on her bedpost as she could not bring herself to display it properly. Suddenly a knock came to her door. Go away, she shouted through her pillow. It's Teenage. I can leave the lady if she wishes. The high priest spoke sweetly through the door. Teenage had been as close as family throughout her life, and she could not let him leave. She opened the door and he saw the saddest, tear-filled face he had seen on her since she was 4 and was almost trampled by that warthog. Oh, my child, you must shake this off. Your father only wants what is best for you. He held her as she tried to dry her tears with her sleeves. Her small face was flushed and her brunette shoulder-length hair a mess. He is the worst. I saved everyone and he called me a liar. What does he know about being a warrior? He's always been a lazy slob sitting in his fancy chair eating and drinking. I hate him, she proclaimed. She threw her face and body back into her pillow and began sobbing all over again. Teenage laid his hand on her shoulder to console her. Oh, child, don't ever say that. Your father was once a very brave warrior. What? Oh, yes. Teenage assured her as he made a place for himself to sit on the bed. Have you ever heard of the Bouvians? Ammee's eyes grew wide as if she'd just seen a ghost. Of course, everyone has. They were the terrible people who went from town to town pillaging and setting fires to everything. They were horrible. Teenage smiled. She remembered his teachings well. That's right. They were horrible, and now they are no more thanks to a crusade led by your father. Ammee sat there on the bed looking very puzzled. My father was a great warrior. Yes, Ammee, and he has seen many battles, and that is why he doesn't want you mixed up in it. He has fought and become king so that you never have to see war. Ammee grew mad all over again. But what about Lewin? He is the child of the king too. Yet he is a knight. Only inside the castle walls, dear. Your father would never let his only son on the battlefield. Teenage quickly corrected her. Ammee tried to understand all of this as she had just learned so much. She sat on the bed, squeezing the locket around her neck between her thumb and index finger. Teenage watched her and smiled as he had just seen a beautiful, friendly ghost. Your mother used to do that same thing, you know. She would stare out the castle window and squeeze that locket. I think she used it to wish her troubles away. Ammee wondered what kind of troubles her mother had. What would worry her so much that she would squeeze the locket like me, she thought. At that moment, the doom bell rang throughout the castle, and that meant only one thing: danger. Teenage peered out the window and glimpsed at least 1,000 dead skellies with swords charging on the castle, and behind them was an angry, 100-foot-tall Skreek. Skreeks were winged beasts with razor-sharp teeth, 6 legs, and 2 claws with long, sharp nails. The Skreek was smashing guard towers left and right, and someone appeared to be riding it. What are those things out there? Ammee shouted. Dead skellies. The bones of long-dead soldiers raised from the grave by some sort of evil spell. Teenage reasoned. He had heard tales of this same type of army marching on Elderberry a week before. He'd brought his worries to the king, but he assured him that there were quite enough soldiers to handle such an army. Grotch has returned. Ammee knew it in her soul. Who else could conjure such evil magic? Throughout the castle, the horns blared, the calling of the guard. Ammee fastened the last piece of her armor and headed for the door. Teenage tried to cover the door with his body. Where are you going, Ammee? There are thousands of dead skellies and 100-foot screek out there. I have to help. You're just a little girl, Taenog yelled without thinking. Ammee's face grew so sad. She looked down at the floor of her bedroom since she could no longer look him in the eye. So you're one of them, she said as she left the room and ran down the steps of the castle. Taenog slumped down on the bed. Outside the castle, the king's guardians, the bravest of Vino's soldiers, gathered in formation as the pikemen were losing fast against the skellies on the battlefield. The archers assembled on the castle wall and began firing at the screek, and luckily, a few of the arrows hit their mark. The beast yelped and charged back, but Groch, riding atop the massive beast, was forceful and commanded the screek to swing at the castle again. When it swung, the far castle wall busted open and stone smashed to pieces like glass. Ammee climbed down the vines of the tower that were nearest to her room and began looking for a weapon. She had no idea what had happened to her sword, but any sword would do at this point. Suddenly, she saw a weapons rack full of axes, crossbows, and swords. She went for the sword, but as soon as she did, a giant piece of the castle dislodged and fell right towards her. At that moment, she was pulled out of the way by someone. "What are you doing out here?" the king asked angrily as he pulled her out of harm's way and near the soldier's den. "I'm here to fight," Ammee responded, eyeing the sword in the rack once more. "I've already told you once, you are not a warrior, and the battlefield is no place for a little girl." The king yelled, "Father, I know you are just trying to protect me, but my place is here on the battlefield." Suddenly, 20 or so soldiers rushed into the den with Lewin leading them. "Father, the skellies are retreating into the woods, but..." Before Lewin could finish his sentence, the ceiling of the den was smashed to pieces by the screek. Several of the guardians were trapped under crumbled pieces of stone, and the king tried desperately to move a big piece off of one of them as the screek's claw gripped the king and pulled him towards its jaw. "No!" Ammee screamed. Lewin looked on in sheer terror. As the creature inspected the king and squeezed him tighter, Groch stared at Ammee, obviously recognizing her. "This is unexpected," Groch menaced as he contemplated his next move. Ammee looked to her brother for guidance, but he seemed frightened. Several of the guards were still trapped, and then Groch set his sights on Lewin. "Are you the leader here, boy?" Groch mocked. Lewin said nothing. His hands began to shake, and Groch laughed as the screek squeezed the king tighter in its claw. "You're no leader, you're nothing," Groch yelled. Lewin dropped his sword and ran away as fast as his legs could carry him. Ammee called for him, but he was long gone. The king looked on in sadness as Ammee picked up a nearby sword and pointed it towards Groch and the screek. The guardians admired Ammee's tenacity and followed her lead as she assaulted the beast, but its strength was overwhelming. With each blow, another guardian was eliminated until there was only Ammee left. She tried another strike with her sword, but Groch used his magic staff to force her to the ground. The broken stone pieces on the ground cut her arm, and she bled a little but got back up. Groch held his staff up. Blue light began to form around the staff, and he pointed it towards Ammee. The king had seen enough. "Please stop, you madman, not my little girl," the king cried, still in the screek's clutches. Groch stared at the king and then at Ammee and smiled. "You dare call me mad?" Groch yelled out as he lowered his staff. "Even a madman can be reasonable, so I will spare your little girl," Groch offered. "For you." The screek squeezed its claw and Ammee screamed. The king was no more.